Hello, how are you doing today? We're going to do a Bible story out of a storybook, and this is about a family. Well, at least one person in the family. The young man's name was Joseph, and Joseph had 10 older brothers and one younger brother named Benjamin, and his father was Jacob. And Benjamin was the youngest, but Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but he was the favorite son, and he was probably a teenager when this story started. But his father gave him a coat of many colors, and everyone was very envious of his coat, and his brothers were a little perturbed. And Joseph was sort of different. Joseph had the ability to understand and to interpret dreams. And sometimes he would dream things and he would tell his brothers or his dad about them, and they'd come true. And during this time, about the time he got the coat, he was telling his brothers that he had had a dream that later that they would have to bow down to him, that he would be ruler over them. Well, you can imagine how his older brothers felt about that. They thought that he had just gotten a little bit too big for his britches. So they were upset with him. Now his older brothers went to take the herds out to find pasture land for them to have food. And they'd been gone for probably a month or so or whatever. And so Joseph's father sent him to go check on them. He sort of spied on them, and he would tell on them if they didn't do what they were supposed to be doing. But Joseph went to where his brothers were, or at least that's what the plan was. But something else happened. His brothers saw him coming with that brightly colored coat, as you could tell, and they started talking. And they kind of got out of hand. And they decided that they were going to get rid of Joseph, that they just had it with the boy. And so they were going to take him, and they were going to throw him in a pit, in a hole in the ground out where they were. And they were just going to leave him there. And so when Joseph came up to where they were, they took him, and they took off his coat of many colors, and they threw him into the pit. Later that day, they happened to see some merchants, like a caravan of camels and people, and they were heading towards Egypt. They were taking merchandise there to be sold, and they had an idea. They sold their brother Joseph to the merchants, and the merchants took him away to Egypt. And the brothers, well, they took that coat of many colors and they tore it, and they put blood on it, and they took it home to their father and told their father that, oh, an animal must have gotten Joseph and killed him. Oh dear, isn't that horrible? But that's what they did. So Joseph proceeded on to, there's him in the pit. He proceeded on to Egypt. And he had many adventures in Egypt. But you know, God was always with him. He always was true to what he believed, and he was always good. He always tried to do the right thing. And sometimes he got in trouble, but usually it really wasn't his fault. But finally, one day, something very important happened. The king, or the Pharaoh in Egypt, had a dream, and no one could figure out what it meant. But Joseph did. And Joseph told the Pharaoh that actually what the dream meant was that there were going to be 7 years when they would have wonderful crops. Everything would grow, and there'd be plenty of food and plenty of extra food. And then there were going to be 7 years when there would be no food. And all the food was going to run out, and the people were going to die if they didn't do something to make sure they saved some of those good years to hold over to the bad years. So the Pharaoh was very impressed with Joseph. And he said, okay, I'm going to make you my second in command. You take care of it. Make sure we have enough food. So Joseph started his work. And he built barns, and he built sheds, and he built places to store the food. And he made sure that people had enough to eat, and they had stuff they had, but also there was plenty set aside for the time that would come. And the time came. And the people's crops didn't come in. They didn't grow. They died. And when they they ate all the food they had in storage, and then they didn't have any food. Well, then they would go to Joseph, and Joseph would sell them more food, and the king would get the money. And so the people would come and do that, and even people from other countries would come so they could get food from Egypt because they had heard that Egypt had food. Well, going back to Joseph's little brothers, or big brothers, they were at home, but they ran out of food too, and they didn't know what they were going to do. And finally their father said, "I hear that there's food in Egypt. Take money and go down to Egypt and buy food and bring it back for us so we will be able to live." And so they went to Egypt to get food. Now, when they got there, they had to go before the man who was in charge of the food. But it had been maybe 9 or 10 years, and Joseph was no longer a teenager. He was a grown man, and they didn't recognize him. But he recognized them. He knew that they were his brothers. And he sold them the food, but he asked them questions. And he asked them, "Well, how do I know you're not a spy?" And they said, "Oh, we're not spies. We have a father back at home, and we have a younger brother named Benjamin." And he said, "Well, okay, I'll give you some food this time, but I want one of you to stay with me." So he chose Simeon to stay with him. And he said, "Y'all can go back home, but when you need more food, before I give you more food, you're going to have to bring your little brother back too, to prove to me that you're not spies. And then I'll let your older brother go too, and y'all can go back home." Well, they weren't too sure about this, but they had to have the food. So they got the food and they went home. And sure enough, time came when they needed more food. And Jacob, their father, didn't want Benjamin to go, but they didn't have any choice. And so they sent Benjamin too and all the other brothers, and they went down to Egypt. When they got there and it was time to go before Joseph, they went to Joseph's house. And Joseph had a feast prepared for them. And he had them sit at his dining table. And his brother Benjamin, well, he gave him more than everybody else. And they didn't understand what was going on. And finally Joseph told all the servants to leave the room. And when they did, he told them, "I'm your brother Joseph that you sold to the merchants a long time ago." And they were afraid because they thought, "Oh no, Joseph is going to kill us because of what we did to him. We were horrible and we've regretted it all these years, but what are we going to do now?" And Joseph said, "No." He said, "Don't you understand? This was all in God's plan. If you hadn't sold me to Egypt, I wouldn't have come down here and saved all this food back so that people would be able to have food to eat now. All of this was God's plan. And it's okay, and I forgive you." And he told them, he said, "I want you to go back home. I want you to get our father, and I want you to get your wives and your children and everything that you want to bring back. And I want you to come back down here to Egypt, and we will take care of you. I will make sure you have food to eat and a place to live and a place for your sheep to go, and I will take care of you. And that is what I want to do." And so that's what his brothers did. And Jacob, who never thought he would see his son Joseph again, was able to see him, and he was so happy. And they lived there for many, many years. And that's the story that'll be next week, is what happens when it's time for them to leave. Okay? I hope you enjoyed the story. It's a very famous story, the story of Joseph and his coat of many colors. You'll hear about it many, many times. I hope you have a great day. Bye.